They say the third time's a charm, but that night, standing beside a mangled bumper and a shaking boy in a hoodie soaked with fear, Nathan knew the third time was a warning. Not about the car, about Eli, about the damage that couldn't be measured in scratches or dents. The kind of damage that came from trying to be someone you're not for too long. The call had come just after midnight. A quiet voice saying something about a curb, a wrong turn, and a traffic cop who could have booked him for reckless driving. Nathan didn't ask questions. He just pulled on jeans, grabbed his keys, and drove into the cold. The car was tilted slightly on the sidewalk, one tire flat, a shattered headlight still flickering like it wasn't sure whether to give up. And next to it, hunched on the curb with his arms wrapped around his knees, was Eli, 21, college junior, first time living off campus. His eyes darted up at Nathan and then away like a child caught sneaking out past curfew. But Nathan didn't yell. He didn't scold. He just walked over, knelt down, and wrapped both arms around the young man he'd been calling son for over a decade. That moment didn't need words. Not right away. Eli hadn't always been like this. When he first came to live with Nathan and Sarah, he was 11, thin, quiet, suspicious of kindness. His stepmother had stripped him of anything resembling comfort. His biological father, a proud man with a perfect church reputation, had remarried quickly after Eli's mother died and seemed content to watch his new wife raise the boy like an obligation. Not love, not protection, just cold meals and colder stares. Sarah, Nathan's wife, had insisted they take him in. "He needs a home, not a roof," she'd said. And she was right. From the beginning, they both knew. Eli was different, not in the way some parents say it like a curse. It was in the way he watched the world with a certain tension in his shoulders, like he was always waiting to be punished for something he hadn't done. It was in how he flinched at affection, how he said thank you like it cost him something. But they never forced it. They loved him, completely and without condition. Sarah used to leave little notes in his lunchbox. Nathan taught him how to hold a wrench and what good music sounded like on a long drive. But then came Sarah's diagnosis, a quiet kind of cancer, the kind that steals slowly. She died when Eli was just shy of 17, and in the months after her funeral, Nathan watched as the boy who just started to open up began to disappear again. Through high school and into college, Eli worked hard at his grades, at fitting in, at pretending to be what his father might finally approve of. He dated girls. He showed up to church. He wore button-downs and forced smiles. But at night, Nathan could hear the music from Eli's room grow louder. And sometimes the soft click of a bottle cap. There were 2 minor fender benders before this one, both explained away as bad parking or slick roads. Nathan had fixed the car each time, no questions asked. He hoped maybe foolishly that it was just stress, but not anymore, because this time, Eli had been driving the wrong way on a one-way street. At night, after drinking, he could have died, or worse, he could have killed someone. Nathan didn't wait, standing on that sidewalk, his arms still wrapped around the boy who looked more like a ghost than the young man he'd raised. Nathan finally said what he'd been holding in for too long. "If you keep trying to be someone you're not, it's going to kill you." Eli didn't flinch. He didn't pull away. He collapsed into the hug, and then the tears came. Not small, quiet ones, but full, aching sobs that shook through his ribs and soaked Nathan's sleeve. It was the kind of cry you hear from someone who's been pretending for so long. They've forgotten what truth feels like. The kind of cry that only comes when the weight finally breaks you. But what surprised Nathan wasn't the crying. It was the laughter that came next. Ugly, wet, broken laughter, like something cracked open inside Eli. And somehow, both of them started laughing through the tears, because he knew. He'd always known they knew. And the relief of it, the brutal, beautiful relief, shattered everything he'd been hiding behind. That night wasn't just about fixing a car. It was about saving a life. And sometimes, all it takes is one person, one voice in the dark saying, "You don't have to pretend anymore." Eli didn't go back to campus that night. They stayed up till morning, sitting in the garage with a busted tire and an untouched tool set between them. He was no longer a boy hiding. He was a young man on the edge of becoming. And Nathan? Nathan was just grateful he'd gotten there in time. If this story touches something in you, don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe to Heart Story for more stories like this, where truth is met with love and silence finally finds its voice. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop pretending. Eli had never cried like that before. Not as a child, not at Sarah's funeral, not even when the stepmother who should have protected him instead chose silence and shame. But something about the way Nathan had spoken, simple, steady, without judgment, tore through the years of denial like a crack in thick ice. The next morning, their clothes still smelled of oil and sweat from the garage. But something between them had shifted. They didn't talk about the breakdown, not the car, not the one in Eli's chest. They just got to work, side by side, hands steady on metal, hearts still a little sore. For the first time in a long time, Eli didn't seem to be performing. There was no nervous laughter, no faked interest in sports, no checking his phone when Nathan made eye contact. Just quiet and a kind of peace. When Sarah was alive, she told Nathan once, long after the adoption papers were signed and Eli was officially part of their household, don't ask him to name what he doesn't have words for yet. He'll come to us when he's ready. Nathan had remembered that. It was why he never pushed, why he never asked about girlfriends or dances or those long weekends Eli spent at a study retreat that left him hollow-eyed and distant. What Nathan hadn't anticipated was how much Eli had worked against himself. Pretending to be straight hadn't just been a disguise. It had been a prison. Eli had built it brick by brick every time he'd laughed at a cruel joke just to blend in. Every time he'd ignored the way his stomach twisted when a boy smiled at him. Even Sarah had sensed it early on. But the pressure to be someone else had buried that truth under years of concrete expectations. His biological father, Martin, had made his stance clear from the start. God makes no mistakes, he'd say, with a pulpit voice and a politician's smile, but his actions had always whispered the opposite. When Eli stopped attending church weekly, Martin accused him of losing his way. When Eli brought home a male friend from art class, a boy who wore eyeliner and had poems on his backpack, Martin had refused to shake his hand. The message was always the same: be acceptable or be invisible. After Sarah died, Nathan had tried to fill that parental space, but he never wanted to replace her or erase Martin entirely. At least not until Eli's face began to change, not physically, but in spirit. There was a tiredness that even youth couldn't cover, a kind of dull ache behind the eyes. Nathan had watched it grow, helpless, until that night with the car. Now, a few days later, Eli joined Nathan in the kitchen while the kettle steamed. He didn't ask for coffee. He just stood there, barefoot on the tile, watching the sunrise crawl across the counter. "I think I've been trying not to exist," Eli said quietly. Nathan didn't respond. He let the silence hold the words where they landed. Eli went on. Not all at once, not with big confessions or cinematic speeches, but slowly, with hesitations, with tremors in his voice. He talked about the years he'd wasted praying to be different, about hating his own reflection, about drinking not to feel good but to stop feeling altogether. And through it all, Nathan listened, never interrupting, never fixing, just staying. That week, they worked together on the car again. Not because it still needed repairs, but because it gave them something to do with their hands while their hearts recalibrated. Eli laughed more. Real laughter. The kind that shakes your shoulders and makes your eyes squint. He started showing Nathan songs he liked. Artists Nathan had never heard of. Some with unapologetic voices, rainbow-colored album covers, and lyrics that finally felt like home. One night, they found Sarah's old toolbox in the garage, the one she used for painting frames. Inside, it was a folded note Nathan had never opened. A list, written in her handwriting. Things I hope Eli knows one day. It read, and under it, that he's not broken, that love doesn't have to hurt, that family can be chosen, that hiding is not the same as surviving, that one day he'll be proud to exist out loud. Nathan didn't read it out loud. He just folded it back and handed it to Eli. For the first time, he saw Eli read something without flinching. Not every story has a loud climax. Some turn on quiet mornings, on scraped knuckles and tea kettles and someone staying long enough for you to speak. That was the beginning of Eli's real healing. Not dramatic, not grand, but grounded. And it taught Nathan something too. That strength isn't always found in holding it together sometimes. It's in finally letting go of the lie. The house had always been quiet since Sarah passed, but there were certain silences that lingered longer, heavier, like rooms where the air hadn't moved in years. One of them sat at the end of the hallway, a guest room that had slowly become a sealed capsule. The door was always closed. Not locked, but respected. It had been Sarah's. Her art supplies, her easel, a few framed memories leaning against the walls. Neither Nathan nor Eli had stepped inside since the funeral. Until that Sunday, they were cleaning out the garage, finally making room after months of putting it off. Eli had come by early, coffee in hand, wearing the same beat-up denim jacket he wore in high school, the kind Sarah once patched herself after it tore at the shoulder. They worked in comfortable silence, just as they had been doing lately. Their rhythm was steady. But as Nathan passed Eli a box labeled frames, Eli paused. "These used to hang in the hallway," he murmured, tracing the edge of the cardboard. His voice dipped into something unspoken. That afternoon, Eli walked down the hall and stopped at the closed door. Something had shifted, not out of obligation, but out of readiness. He turned the knob slowly. Dust hung in soft rays through the blinds, the smell of old paint and lavender lingering. The room was just as Sarah had left it, a folded blanket on the chair, brushes standing upright in glass jars, a photograph of the three of them, Sarah in the middle, smiling, Eli barely a teenager, trying not to. There was a box beneath the small writing desk. Not hidden, just waiting. Eli opened it carefully. Inside were envelopes, most of them sealed, each marked with dates. A few had his name on them. Others were letters Sarah had written but never sent. At the bottom of the box was something else, a worn-out medical folder, tucked beneath a sketchbook. When Eli opened it, the ultrasound photo slipped out. His hands froze. The black and white blur showed two shapes, but the markings were clear enough. One fetus, one name. The printed date matched the final year of Sarah's life, but there had never been a baby. He sat on the edge of the bed, the ultrasound photo resting on his palm like something sacred. When he heard footsteps behind him, he didn't turn. Nathan stood at the door. "You knew?" Eli asked, not accusing, just barely audible. Nathan nodded. She was pregnant. But the miscarriage, it broke something in her. She didn't want to talk about it. Not to me, not to you. Eli let out a breath that trembled. Why did she keep this? Nathan stepped closer, his voice low. Because it mattered to her. Because even for a few weeks, that child was real. And because after she lost it, she told me, "You were the only baby who stayed." The words landed like an anchor. Eli hadn't expected them, hadn't prepared to feel chosen. Nathan sat beside him, resting his hand gently on the edge of the mattress. "That's why I've always called you son, not because I was trying to replace your father, but because Sarah saw you that way. From the beginning, and after she died, I needed you to know that someone had chosen you. Not by blood, but by love." Eli stared down at the photo, the unborn sibling he never met, the silent grief Sarah had carried, and the weight of knowing that somehow, through all the years he thought he was unwanted, someone had already claimed him with more than paperwork, with intention. That evening, he placed the ultrasound back in the folder, folded the letters, and locked the room behind him. Not because he was closing something off, but because it had been opened. A truth that finally had a place. Later, as they ate dinner in the backyard, Eli looked at Nathan, a man who had no obligation to raise him, who had every reason to step away after Sarah's death, but never did. He realized something then. Love, Love isn't always spoken aloud in thoughts. Sometimes it's in the door you're allowed to open when you're finally ready. Sometimes it's in the silence that waits, patiently, for truth to arrive. And sometimes it's in the hands that hold you steady, even when you've fallen apart more than once. There are moments that linger long after they end. Some are beautiful, others unbearable. For Nathan, the memory of Sarah's funeral lives somewhere between the two, not because of the eulogies or the music or the quiet procession of guests, but because of one figure who stood at the back of the chapel, arms folded, lips tight, never speaking in a word. Martin, Eli's biological father. He hadn't brought flowers. He hadn't approached the casket. He hadn't looked at Eli once. Just stood there, like a judge called to witness a verdict he never believed in. And then he left. No goodbye, no gesture of sympathy, only the cold echo of shoes on polished floor. Nathan had never told Eli about that day in full. There had been too much grief already, too much lost. Sarah was gone, and Eli had barely turned 17. The weight of that funeral didn't belong to a boy already carrying more than he should have. But now, years later, as Eli leaned into the truth of who he was and began shedding the weight of shame, he brought the question forward himself. Was he there? Nathan knew who he meant. He nodded. He came, didn't speak, didn't stay long. Eli looked away, not surprised, just quietly resigned. I thought maybe, if she died, he'd find something human in himself. He said, guess not. It wasn't bitterness, not anymore, just clarity. It was in that stillness that Eli decided something. Sarah had never gotten the farewell she deserved. Not from the people who mattered, not from her brother, who had shut himself off, not from the friends who assumed time would soften his grief, and certainly not from the man who'd contributed to so much of her pain and silence. So he planned something different. It wasn't a second funeral. It was a remembrance. In the garden Sarah had loved, where she used to plant lavender and tomatoes side by side like poetry, the invitation was simple, a gathering of love for the woman who gave it freely. People came, neighbors, old classmates, a few colleagues from the art co-op where she once taught painting on Saturdays. And Eli, for the first time, stood in front of them, not as a grieving boy, but as the man she had raised. No scripts, no performance. He began with a memory. A quiet summer day, Sarah dancing barefoot in the kitchen to an old Stevie Wonder record while stirring spaghetti sauce. Eli had laughed and told her she was embarrassing. She winked and said, "That's what moms are for." Then he paused, and for a moment it seemed like that would be the end. But Eli took a breath and let the rest come. "I spent a lot of years hiding," he said, trying to be smaller, straighter, safer. "My father told me that being different was a sin. My sister Sarah told me it was okay to take up space. She didn't say it directly. She showed it. In every meal, every warm towel, every time she waited for me to speak without forcing the words out of me." Nathan stood off to the side, arms crossed loosely, proud, steady. "I didn't get to say goodbye to her the way I wanted." Eli continued, "But today, I want to say something I never had the courage to say while she was alive." He looked at the faces around him. Some knew, others might have guessed. "I'm gay, and I'm not ashamed. Because of her, because of the home she gave me, and because I was never unloved. Even when I didn't know how to love myself." The garden was silent. Not tense, just full. A stillness that felt like reverence. Afterward, guests approached quietly, some with tears, some with embraces. No one walked away unchanged. Later that evening, Nathan and Eli sat on the porch. The sun dipped low behind the trees, casting amber light across the railing. She would have been proud. Nathan said. Eli didn't answer right away. He watched a bee settle into one of the lavender blooms. Then he turned. Did she know? Nathan smiled gently. From the start, Eli nodded. Then maybe. I wasn't as alone as I thought. In truth, he never had been. There's a power in reclaiming space once taken by shame, a strength in saying aloud what fear once kept quiet. But the real transformation comes not in being accepted by the world, it comes in accepting yourself. When you finally realize the people who mattered never stopped loving you, not even once. The award ceremony wasn't anything extravagant. No tuxedos, no flashing lights. Just a small city auditorium filled with folding chairs and people who had shown up not for fame, but for impact. Eli had been nominated by the youth center he volunteered at. Most of the kids he mentored didn't know his full story, but they knew he showed up, that he listened, that he fought to keep the doors open when funding was cut, and stayed late when someone needed a safe place to crush some. Nathan sat in the second row, wearing a navy button-down and that familiar, quiet pride in his eyes. Beside him, Melissa leaned in, whispering something that made him smile. They hadn't made a big announcement about the engagement Eli already knew. He'd hugged them both and said only, "She's got a good heart." Sarah would have liked her. As Eli walked up to the podium, the room quieted. He looked taller than Nathan remembered, more grounded, still sensitive, still open but no longer carrying the weight of apology. He began by thanking the people who supported him, the center, his colleagues, the youth who taught him resilience in return. But as his voice settled into the microphone, the tone shifted. Most people, he said, assume that coming out is the hardest part, that saying "I'm gay" out loud takes everything you've got. But that's not true. Not for me. The hardest part was believing I deserved to be heard in the first place. A pause. I tried for years to be someone I wasn't, to fit a mold designed by fear and silence. And it nearly destroyed me. Not because of who I was, but because of who I was pretending to be. He looked directly at Nathan. What saved me wasn't just a hug in the garage or kind words. What saved me, was a secret that stayed hidden for 11 years. One my sister Sarah kept until the day she died. A hush fell over the audience. Eli's voice didn't waver. She once carried a child. I never knew. No one did. She lost the baby, and it broke something inside her. But instead of disappearing into that grief, she turned to me and gave me something even more precious than life. She gave me a place to belong. And when she was gone, the man she loved, the man I call my brother Dad, picked up where she left off. Nathan stared at the floor then, his jaw clenched, his eyes wet. Eli smiled. I'm not standing here today because I was brave. I'm here because someone else believed in me long before I could believe in myself. Because love, when given freely and without condition, can rewrite everything. The room stood in silence. Not because they didn't know what to say, but because they knew better than to fill a moment that had finally come home. After the ceremony, Nathan and Eli walked out into the cool night air. No fanfare, no need for words, just the sound of traffic in the distance and the quiet understanding between two people who had survived more than most would ever guess. Eli had once thought that love needed to be proven, that it had to be earned, or justified, or fought for. But now, he knew better. Real love is what stays when everything else falls apart. It's the hand on your shoulder at your lowest. The room that waits until you are ready. The man who shows up at midnight without asking why. And the sister who writes your name in a list of hopes instead of regrets. Maybe you've known a love like that. Maybe you are someone's safe place. Or maybe, like Eli once was, you're still waiting for someone to tell you it's okay to stop pretending. So now I ask you, who was that one person who saw you, even when you couldn't see yourself? Tell us in the comments. Someone out there needs your story too. Subscribe to Heart Story for more stories where truth is louder than shame, and silence is finally broken with love. Because here you don't have to be perfect, you just have to be real.